Welcome back to the Global Goals Studio. I'm Chika Odua here with Richard Wolff. Today, the SDG Action Zone theme is people, our issues, health and education, gender equality, racial justice, vulnerable populations, and food security. We are privileged today to have Amina Mohammed, the UN Deputy Secretary General and Chair of the Sustainable Development Group. Let's get right to it. It's fair to say this is a moment in time unlike any other in history. A global pandemic, widespread political turmoil, unrelenting climate disasters, and a deep recession all happening at the same time. 2020 kicked off the decade of action for delivering on the SDGs. The agenda is bold, and the timeline is short, especially with the current pandemic. Can the target be met by the deadline that's been set?
Absolutely. I think it can be. I mean, all the more reason. We were off track before COVID. With COVID, I think it's given us additional impetus to know that the best framework we have for any recovery right now is the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. And so I think that with a more concerted and global response on all of these different issues that are so interrelated, we can make a big push to get the decade done. It's really exciting because we've launched this when the UN is 75 and when it's reconsidering how it itself becomes more fit for purpose to serve the communities that it does writ large.
Right. The SDGs revolve so much around the people, the planet, and partnerships. How do you think that these three elements fit together?
Well, certainly, if you look at the goals themselves, you'll find that every one of them are interrelated in terms of the people piece is really about our women. It's about poverty. It's about inequalities, access to basic rights, which are seen in services, health, and education, fundamental. But at the same time, knowing that as you're looking for the jobs and the inclusive economies, you can't do it to the detriment of the environment, for which we're seeing now climate change is, of course, man-made and the emissions are off the chart. So this is where the two come in. Now, lifting it in the public service, government just doing it alone is not possible. I mean, as you say, the ambition to get to where we need to get to and the time we have needs partnerships. And it needs partnerships from business, from civil society, and all the other parts of the multilateral system that will help us to lift it. So lifting the agenda, as I said, in goals 16 and 17 for me are what lift the other 15. Strong institutions, but great partnerships.
Excellent. Thank you so much for talking about the interconnected nature of all of these goals. The UN is 75 years old and is facing its most daunting challenges yet. Where does the UN need to head as it embarks on the next 75 years? Where do you think that the greatest priorities lie?
Well, I think first and foremost was that we did listen to young people. I think that the 75 years is coming at a time when we've got an intergenerational shift, and it's to a younger generation in a period of time where the tools, the technology, where the next probably environment we're talking about is cities and this huge cohort of young people. So I think the UN has to have a much more inclusive and networked multilateralism where there are many more people at the table defining and shaping the future. Of course, these goals for me help direct us in a way that brings us together in a much more interrelated way, as you said earlier, but also with the partnerships and the way that we should be. Peace is at the center of this. It can't happen without a respect for human rights, but the root causes of conflict, of instabilities in this world today can be found in the solutions that the goals provide. Inequalities, women not having equal access to basic rights and health and education, and you know, the injustice of poverty and hunger. Food systems that need to be redesigned to respond to a global population.
Amina Mohammed, you worked obviously heroically to get these global goals in place 5 years ago. The world looked very different then. Do you find that it's more of a battle now than it was then to convince member states that this is something they have signed up to and have to follow through on at a time, obviously, of the pandemic and recession when countries may be looking inward?
Well, it's an unprecedented time. I mean, a tiny little virus has brought us all to our knees in one capacity or another. And as we responded to the health crisis, we suddenly found that you've got a side effect in the economies, and it's affecting the most vulnerable. So everybody looked inwards. The first thing people did was, I've got to take care of my own. And what we're trying to say now is that, look, when this virus exists anywhere, it's everywhere. And so it has to be a global response. And as much as we respect that one has to take care of their own first, if you like the analogy, put an oxygen mask on first, and then you can grab others. Now it's time to grab others, because the trillions that are being spent in some parts of the world on their stimulus packages need to be a response that we see everywhere. So it is more difficult, but we're making the case through the different platforms that we're convening around the world on finance, on health, and, you know, for instance, the ACT Accelerator that is looking for the people's vaccine.
Thank you, Mrs. Mohammed. Please stay with us. We'll be right back on Global Goals Studio.